There is a particular category of individuals who possess a highly unusual trait. Upon entering any space, they immediately sense when the atmosphere feels slightly off. Even in the absence of raised voices or visible drama, their minds have already completed a full scan of the environment. They catch every averted gaze, forced grin, or seemingly normal sentence that actually carries a layer of artificial energy. While many view this keen sense of observation as a remarkable superpower or a gift, this intense level of perception is frequently a psychological snare. The real issue is that their intellect lacks a shutdown mechanism. Unable to simply experience the present, they carry these moments home to dissect, critique, and replay them continuously in their minds. They are the type of individuals capable of expanding a brief pause into a massive galaxy of internal reflection. If you happen to be one of them or know someone who is, you understand firsthand how challenging it can be. This state of hyper-awareness goes far beyond mere intelligence. It involves constantly detecting the subtle undercurrents of meaning that the rest of the world overlooks without a second thought. It can easily feel like a blessing, yet it remains a heavy weight that gradually depletes your emotional reserves. In this discussion, we will analyze the inner workings of highly perceptive individuals and explore how they can prevent themselves from being overwhelmed by their own thoughts. To begin, we must examine where this sharp perception originates. Modern psychology generally categorizes this trait into two distinct groups. For the first category, this high level of sensitivity is entirely innate. In scientific terms, these individuals are known as highly sensitive persons, or HSPs. They possess a specific trait referred to as sensory processing sensitivity, or SPS. From birth, their nervous system functions as an incredibly delicate filter that inherently absorbs and experiences environmental stimuli with much greater intensity than the average person. For this group, reality is perpetually experienced in ultra-high definition. Conversely, for the second category, this extreme awareness is not an inherent trait from birth. It is a legacy, a mechanism developed for self-preservation. In neuroscience, this condition is identified as hypervigilance. It usually develops within an unpredictable emotional environment during someone's formative years, most frequently throughout early childhood. Picture a youngster growing up in a household where adult temperaments shift as unpredictably as the weather. A child in that situation cannot afford to live carefreely. They must learn to function as an emotional radar. They might be the youngster who learned to identify the specific sound of car tires on the driveway just to determine if their parent was returning home intoxicated or calm. They trained themselves to judge a parent's level of anger simply by the volume of a slamming cabinet. They figured out precisely when to walk into the room with a smile and when to hide away silently in a corner. From a biological standpoint, their amygdala, the neural alarm system for danger, was kept in a state of constant activation. It imprints a lasting lesson. This environment is unsafe, so I must perpetually monitor my surroundings to stay out of harm's way. This was never explicitly taught to them. Their nervous system naturally created neural pathways designed to anticipate emotional crises before they occurred. Over time, this protective alertness shifts into a permanent state of heightened perception. That deep-seated awareness eventually integrates into their core personality. As adults, they frequently look back with self-blame, wondering why they constantly overanalyze everything and if something is fundamentally wrong with them. However, they are not broken. They simply possess a form of intelligence forged through survival. The protective armor that once kept them safe has eventually bonded to their identity. When that protective mechanism, that intense awareness, carries over into adulthood, how does it actually manifest? Let us examine the first indicator, existing in a perpetual state of analysis. This represents the most prominent symptom and the one that demands the highest amount of energy. While an average individual views a conversation as a simple exchange, these people have a mind that is constantly solving a hidden equation. Consider a practical scenario. A manager sends a brief message on an app at 4 p.m., asking to chat for a moment later on. To anyone else, this is merely a standard meeting. For them, however, reading those words instantly triggers a wave of internal anxiety. They detect an unusual tone in the phrasing, sensing an underlying coldness that may not even exist. They pick up on the sender's mood and immediately start doubting themselves, wondering if their boss is displeased or if they committed an error. They do not merely process spoken words, they note the precise 3-second delay before an associate compliments their outfit. They register the tiniest shift in another person's breathing pattern. This occurrence is partly linked to the functioning of the default mode network, or DMN, which manages introspection and self-focused thought. In the average person, the DMN activates primarily during periods of rest or daydreaming. For hyper-aware individuals, however, this specific network remains highly active, forcing the intellect into an endless cycle of scrutiny and decoding. One part of them is actively engaging in life, nodding, smiling, and holding a warm drink, while the other part is busy taking mental notes, cross-referencing data points, and dissecting the entire interaction. Consequentially, their minds rarely experience true tranquility. They can feel utterly drained even after a full day of sitting quietly at a desk, simply because their brain has been running an invisible intellectual marathon. This intense scrutiny is not just directed outward, it reverses its focus inward, leading directly to the second indicator: extreme self-consciousness. In cognitive psychology, metacognition refers to the capacity to evaluate your own internal thought processes, a function managed by the prefrontal cortex. Everyone possesses this capacity, but for these individuals, it acts as a mechanism that never shuts down. They do not merely experience a feeling, they actively supervise it. The typical internal sequence usually unfolds in a very specific way. An emotion surfaces, followed immediately by intense dissection, which then leads to harsh self-judgment. If they happen to feel a sudden wave of sadness while walking outside, instead of simply experiencing the feeling, they immediately become defensive and critical. They question the validity of their sadness, wondering why they feel so empty despite having a good career, and ultimately label themselves as ungrateful or flawed for feeling that way. Even moments of happiness are subjected to this intense scrutiny. While laughing at a joke during a social gathering, a part of their awareness instantly detaches, looking down from above to critique the behavior. They wonder if their laughter seemed overly loud or appeared artificial. This experience is highly comparable to trying to dance while constantly monitoring your posture in a mirror. They might execute every single step flawlessly, yet they completely lose the natural rhythm of the dance. Their level of perception deepens, but their authentic presence in the moment slowly evaporates. When this analytical mindset operates for too long, it leads to the third indicator: a loss of simple innocence within interpersonal connections. This deep perception forces them to witness the backstage mechanics of human behavior. Psychologists refer to this as making strong inferences regarding the motives of others, a concept tied to the theory of mind. They become acutely aware that individuals rarely express exactly what they are thinking. Upon receiving a complimentary coffee and praise from a coworker, their mind bypasses the kind gesture to instantly evaluate potential ulterior motives. They question what future favor this person might request, or if they are seeking access to confidential client information. They come to understand that human kindness can sometimes be transactional, that affection can be a calculated move, and that an individual's confidence on a date might just be a mask hiding a deep fear of rejection. This realization brings a quiet sense of grief. This is not the passing of childhood innocence, but rather the loss of simplicity in relationships. The capacity to wholeheartedly trust the surface value of words vanishes. Consequently, every compliment feels loaded with alternative meanings, and no apology ever seems entirely genuine because they assume the other person is merely trying to diffuse the tension rather than expressing true remorse. Promises begin to feel incredibly fragile. They do not grow cynical or resentful toward society. They simply become exceptionally guarded. At times, they experience profound isolation even within a large group because no one else appears to perceive the deeper realities they are witnessing. Furthermore, this perception is not merely a logical exercise. It deeply affects their emotional state, leading to the fourth indicator: an empathy response that is permanently active. For these individuals, empathy is not a conscious tool utilized only when comforting a grieving companion. It functions as an involuntary state of being. They can step into a silent conference room and immediately absorb the intense friction between two colleagues. Their consciousness operates much like a piece of highly absorbent paper. Psychology defines this capacity as cognitive empathy, but for the hyper-aware, it goes far beyond intellectual understanding. It spills over into emotional empathy, causing them to genuinely absorb and experience the suffering of another person as though it were happening to them directly. This process is deeply tied to the brain's empathetic neural pathways, particularly mirror neurons. When observing another person displaying emotion, these specific neurons fire within their own brain, mimicking the exact feeling. For a highly perceptive individual, this translates into total emotional absorption. Sitting next to a restless passenger on a train can cause their own heart rate to spike, and hearing a friend discuss a painful separation can leave them carrying that emotional weight for days. What is the ultimate outcome? They inadvertently become the emotional shock absorbers for everyone around them. They naturally master the art of softening their tone and selecting precise words to diffuse tension. People gravitate toward them because they offer profound validation, but this comes at the cost of utter exhaustion. They turn into a repository for the emotional burdens of others. At the end of the day, very few people stop to consider that the individual who listens so deeply also requires a safe space to be heard. These absorbed emotions do not simply vanish, they manifest directly within the physical body, leading to the fifth indicator, the intersection of bodily awareness and anxiety. Perception does not occur solely within the intellect. Science terms this phenomenon interoception, the capacity to monitor the internal physiological state of the body, which is processed by the insular cortex. Highly perceptive individuals often possess an incredibly sensitive interoceptive system. If they consume a strong coffee and experience a slight elevation in heart rate from the caffeine, it triggers a chain reaction. While a typical person views this simply as a burst of energy, a sensitive nervous system interprets the accelerated pulse differently. The brain reviews its historical data and flashes a warning that a rapid heartbeat signifies immediate danger, signaling an impending panic attack. Perfectly normal bodily functions are transformed into alarming red flags, establishing a destructive cycle of anxiety. A physical sensation occurs. The brain erroneously categorizes it as a threat, and the body subsequently initiates a stress response. This reaction releases stress hormones like cortisol, which only intensifies the physical sensations. Consequently, their physical form remains trapped in a perpetual stream of crisis data, leaving them feeling constantly restless and unsafe even when no actual danger is present. When these physical and emotional inputs become completely overwhelming, the intellect searches for a final defense mechanism to re-establish order. This is the precise moment where perception quietly shifts from a tool for observation into a strategy for absolute control. This does not manifest as a desire to dominate others outwardly. Rather, it serves as a subtle internal shield. They live by a quiet, unwritten rule. They believe that if they can successfully anticipate every conceivable outcome, they can shield themselves from unexpected emotional pain. For them, intellectual understanding serves as a form of protective armor. They convince themselves that foreseeably mapping out potential disappointments will prevent them from breaking apart when those challenges inevitably arrive. Their subconscious runs constant simulations, working silently and endlessly in the background. They constantly question what would happen if a loved one suddenly withdrew or if everything they have built collapsed overnight. They map out exactly how they should react to the worst-case scenarios just to ensure they remain standing. This mental loop leads directly to analysis paralysis, leaving them trapped in a labyrinth of hypotheses, experiencing multiple versions of the future instead of fully inhabiting the present moment. This unrelenting state of alertness prevents them from ever truly anchoring themselves in the now. The most unfortunate consequence of this defensive approach is the profound trade-off it demands. In their constant effort to outsmart potential suffering, they gradually isolate themselves from their own experiences. Instead of engaging with life's unpredictable beauty, they treat existence like a volatile project that must be managed. Self-protection ultimately replaces genuine engagement, leaving them entirely drained from perpetually defending against imaginary future crises. Given this reality, what steps can highly perceptive individuals take? They cannot simply turn off their awareness, as that would be like asking someone with perfect eyesight to intentionally view the world as a blur. The goal is not to reduce perception, but rather to stop carrying the weight of everything they see. In psychological therapy, this challenge is typically addressed by establishing firm emotional boundaries and restructuring cognitive habits. They must train themselves to witness occurrences without absorbing the accompanying emotional weight. Those who successfully overcome this burden generally anchor their daily lives around three liberating concepts. First, they accept that a quiet moment does not automatically imply a hidden problem. When someone takes time to respond to a message, it often just means they are tired. If a colleague passes by without greeting them, it might simply be due to a headache. They learn to stop internalizing external behaviors. Second, they realize that experiencing an emotion does not require an immediate solution. When anxiety surfaces, instead of overanalyzing it, they simply acknowledge the physical sensation of a racing heart without judging it, allowing it to pass naturally. Third, they accept that not every observation requires a response or an action. They can recognize someone's deep-seated insecurity without feeling obligated to act as their counselor. They can spot instability within a dynamic and decide that the healthiest choice is to simply maintain a respectful distance. They discover that insight is only beneficial when coupled with boundaries, allowing them to differentiate between what requires their attention and what should be left alone. As they begin to adopt this practice of letting go, a remarkable internal transformation occurs. Their perception does not fade. Instead, it softens and matures. They continue to view human nature with immense depth, but they no longer fixate on the flaws of others. They can still read the energy of a room clearly, but they are no longer swept away by its current. The core shift happens within their perspective. They transition from utilizing awareness as a predictive shield to using it as a tool for mindful presence, shifting from a place of fear to one of genuine curiosity. Instead of analyzing whether a companion's smile is authentic, they simply appreciate the warmth of the sun and a pleasant cup of coffee. Their existence finally begins to feel lighter, not because the world has simplified, but because they have changed. The environment around them remains complex and full of contradictions. Life feels lighter simply because they have stopped attempting to solve every single equation simultaneously. They cannot extinguish the bright light in their mind, but they can learn to dim its focus. They can transform it from a harsh spotlight that highlights every imperfections into the gentle glow of a candle. This gentle illumination is bright enough to comprehend human vulnerability, yet soft enough to offer them comfort. These are the individuals who think and feel with profound depth. If you ever observe their quiet demeanor, understand that it does not stem from a place of apathy. It represents a beautiful form of wisdom, a wisdom that has mastered the art of understanding life without being trapped by it. If this description resonates with you, and you recognize your own experiences within this profile of hyper-awareness, feel free to share which indicator reflects your life the most. Always keep in mind that you are not walking this path alone. The immense depth you possess is not a psychological defect. It is a profound gift that simply requires your own understanding and self-compassion. If these insights offered you a sense of relief and provided a fresh perspective on your inner world, please consider liking and sharing this content with someone who might need it. Perhaps a friend who is equally exhausted by the ceaseless chatter of an overactive mind. Your validation today could provide the exact reassurance they are searching for. Thank you deeply for sharing your time with me today.